In the previous video, we saw how to make out package execute as a program. In this video, we're going to see how to make the program read data from its command line, a common feature for programs of all sorts. Most command line programs, and a surprising number of graphical user interface programs as well, can be given extra information on the command line after the command that invokes the program. These extra bits of information are referred to as arguments, and they are delivered to Python programs as a list of strings. It turns out that there's quite a lot of code involved in turning an argument list into useful information, especially when we want to make the program as convenient for our users as possible. Fortunately, a lot of that code can be the same from program to program, and the Python standard library's argparse module takes care of much of the effort for us. The primary component of the argparse module is the argument parser class. In the minimal case, it only takes 3 lines of code to use argparse. We need to import it, create an argument parser instance, and call that instance's parse_args function. As usual with minimal cases, that's not very useful. The only arguments that the program would respond to are -h or --help, either of which would print out an automatically generated how to use this program message and then exit the program. The first thing we could do to make the argument parser more useful is to provide a value for the description parameter of its constructor. Argument parser's automatically generated help message will explain all the arguments that the program expects, but it doesn't say anything about what the program is actually supposed to do unless we provide a description ourselves. The next way we can improve the argument parser's behavior is by telling it the name of the program. If we don't provide a name, it will do its best to make a reasonable guess, but we're better off telling it ourselves. I consider the python-m command to be the canonical name for my own programs, so that's what we'll use in our examples. We set the name by passing it as a string to the argument parser constructor's prog parameter. Those changes make the programs help output prettier and more useful, but they don't actually give the program any new capabilities. We need to start adding argument specifications to the parser so we could check for them in the argument list. We do that by calling the argument parser instance's add_argument method. Argparse recognizes 2 kinds of arguments, optional arguments and positional arguments. As the name implies, optional arguments are not required, but if the user chooses to include them, they have meaning. Positional arguments, on the other hand, are required by default, although we can modify that behavior. Optional arguments have names that start with the dash character and can have more than one alternate name for the same argument. The names are passed as parameters to the add_argument method. As in this example where -p and --print are alternate names for the same optional argument. There are a lot of ways of configuring an argument when we add it to the parser, which are detailed in the argparse documentation in the library reference on docs.python.org. For options like our print example, though, the important configuration items are the action and the default. The action tells argparse what to do when it binds the argument on the command line, and the default tells it what to do when it doesn't find the argument on the command line. The action parameter can either be a string containing the name of one of the well-known actions, like store_true, or it could be a subclass of the argparse.action class. The default can be any arbitrary value, which will be stored as the value of the argument if it's missing when we actually ask the parser to parse out the argument values. The other kind of argument has to have just one name, and it can't start with a dash character. By default, these arguments collect one word that isn't part of an optional argument from the command line, in the order that they were added to the parser. If we configure the argument using the nargs option, we could change the number of words that the argument collects. If we set nargs to a number, that many words will be collected for the argument. We can also set nargs to star to mean any number of words, or plus to mean at least one word. There are a few other variables, other values, we could set an args to, but we won't talk about them here. Let's look back at our pipeline program. I think we wanted to understand two arguments, an optional argument that tells it to keep going, even if one of the programs returns an error code, and a file name, where it should load and store a pipeline configuration. After the call to parse_args, we have an object named args, what contains a keep_going attribute, set to either true or false, and a file name attribute containing a string. Notice that the attribute of the argument's object is keep_going, not keep-going. Python doesn't allow dash characters inside of attribute names. And argparse is smart enough to fix that for us automatically. If we wanted to set the name of the argument object attribute manually, we could have passed the name we wanted to, the add_argument method, as its best parameter. Now that we've worked out how to read the information that's given to us when the program starts, in the next video, we're going to look at how to interact with the user while the program is running.